I realized something was wrong the moment my son invited me to dinner. Daniel never invited me anywhere. Not anymore. For the past 3 years, our conversations had been limited to short phone calls and polite holiday visits. The kind where everyone smiles too much and no one says anything real. So when he called and said, "Mom, Melissa and I want to take you out to celebrate," I immediately knew this wasn't about celebration. It was about a decision. People always say they want to talk when the talking part is already finished. I still went, of course. A mother always goes. The restaurant Daniel chose was one of those places that tried very hard to look expensive. Dim lighting, polished glasses, waiters who spoke quietly as if secrets were constantly being exchanged. Melissa was already there when I arrived. She stood up politely when she saw me. Her smile looked perfect. Too perfect. The kind of smile someone practices in a mirror. "Margaret," she said warmly, "you look wonderful." "Thank you," I replied. Melissa always used my name. Never Mom. Never anything personal. Just Margaret. It had always been that way. At first, I assumed she simply needed time to feel comfortable with me. But after 10 years of marriage to my son, it was clear that distance wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. Daniel arrived a few minutes later. He kissed my cheek, sat down, and immediately reached for the menu like a man trying to delay a difficult conversation. We ordered wine. Small talk followed. Weather, traffic, work. The usual polite nonsense people exchange before they say what they actually mean. Then Daniel cleared his throat. And there it was. "Mom," he said carefully. Melissa folded her hands on the table like someone preparing for a meeting. Daniel continued. "We've been thinking a lot about the future." I nodded slowly. Whenever someone says we've been thinking, it means you're about to hear something you won't like. We're worried about you living alone in that house. There it was. The house. I had lived there for 38 years. Daniel had grown up there. His father and I bought it when we were both 30, back when the neighborhood was nothing but dirt roads and construction signs. Back when everyone told us it was a bad investment. "I'm doing fine," I said calmly. Melissa tilted her head sympathetically. "But the house is enormous." Daniel jumped in quickly. "Too big for one person." Interesting. I had lived there alone for 3 years since my husband passed away. But apparently, it had only just become too big tonight. "I manage," I said. Melissa leaned forward slightly. "That's not really the point." Of course it wasn't. "The property value is incredibly high right now," she continued. Daniel nodded. "You could sell it and live somewhere more practical." There was that word again. Practical. Melissa loved that word. She used it whenever she wanted to make something sound logical instead of selfish. "And what would I do with the money?" I asked. Daniel and Melissa exchanged a quick glance. That was the moment I knew. They had already planned the answer. "Well," Daniel said carefully, "Melissa and I have been looking at houses." Of course they had. "We're thinking about starting a family," he added. Melissa placed her hand gently over his. "The current market is brutal," she said softly, "and a larger home would give us space to grow." I nodded. I could almost see the spreadsheet forming in her mind. My house, their future, simple math. "So let me understand," I said. "You want me to sell my home so you can buy a bigger one?" Daniel winced slightly. "When you say it like that." "How should I say it?" Melissa jumped in. "We're thinking about the whole family." "Ah, the whole family." A phrase people use when they mean they're part of the family. Daniel leaned forward again. "You wouldn't even need the entire amount," he added quickly. "We just need help with the down payment." Just. Such a small word. But it usually hides a very large request. "How much help?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. Melissa didn't. "About 800,000. The number hung in the air like a dropped glass. Daniel watched my face carefully, waiting, measuring, expecting resistance. But I simply nodded slowly. "I see." Melissa relaxed slightly. Daniel reached for his wine. He thought the hard part was over. It wasn't, because while they had been busy planning my financial future, they had forgotten something important. For the past year, I had been planning my own, and that changed everything. Daniel waited for my reaction. $800,000. He tried to look calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Melissa, on the other hand, looked almost relaxed now, like someone who had finally reached the point in the conversation she had been steering toward all evening. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip of water.
Not wine.
Water. When people expect a fight, silence makes them far more nervous. Daniel cleared his throat. Of course, we're not asking you to decide tonight, he added quickly. Melissa nodded. We just want you to consider what makes the most sense for everyone. Everyone. Such a generous word. But strangely enough, it never seemed to include me. Let me ask you something, I said. Daniel looked relieved that I was talking again.
Sure.
When did you start looking at houses? Daniel hesitated. Melissa answered immediately. About 6 months ago. 6 months. Interesting. Have you already chosen one? Daniel shifted in his seat. Maybe. Melissa gave a small smile. We found something perfect.
Perfect.
Of course they did. And you were planning to buy it with my help, I said. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Well, yes. I nodded slowly. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Before or after I sold my house? The table went quiet. Melissa blinked once. Just once. But that was enough. Daniel looked confused. What do you mean? I said calmly. Did you already make an offer on this perfect house? Daniel didn't answer. Melissa did. We're in negotiations. Of course they were. I leaned back slightly in my chair. And the down payment deadline is soon. Melissa's smile faded. How did you know that? Because people rarely bring up financial generosity unless they are already committed to spending the money. Daniel exhaled. The seller wants a decision in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So this dinner wasn't a conversation.
It was a deadline.
I looked at my son. My house hasn't even been listed yet. Daniel frowned. Well, we assumed you would sell. Assumed. Melissa's fingers tightened slightly around her wine glass. We just thought it would make sense. For who?
But I didn't ask that.
Instead, I asked something else. Daniel, I said gently, have you actually seen my financial accounts? He blinked. What? You seem very confident about how much money I have. Melissa's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Daniel shook his head. No, of course not. Then how did you arrive at 800,000? This time Daniel looked at Melissa, and Melissa didn't answer immediately. She studied me carefully, measuring, recalculating. Then she spoke. Your house is worth close to $2 million. Yes. And the mortgage has been paid off for years. Yes. And you have retirement savings. Yes. All true. But you forgot one detail, I said. Melissa raised an eyebrow. What detail? I never said I was selling the house. Daniel blinked again. You just said you were considering it. Yes. Melissa leaned forward. Margaret, the market is perfect right now. Her voice had changed. Less warm. More persuasive. The longer you wait, the more you risk losing value. I smiled slightly. I'm not worried about that. Daniel sighed. Mom, this isn't about money. It's about practicality.
Practical again.
Melissa nodded quickly. And family. That word again. Family. It sounded noble. But suddenly I realized something very interesting. For 10 years, Melissa had kept me at a polite distance. Holiday dinners, birthday cards, occasional visits, but never warmth, never closeness. And now, suddenly, my assets were part of family planning. Funny how that works. Daniel, I said softly. Yes. Do you remember the summer you were 15? He looked surprised. What? The summer you built the treehouse. He laughed quietly. Of course. You worked on it every day. Daniel nodded. Dad helped. Yes, I said. But do you remember what he told you when the first platform collapsed? Daniel smiled faintly. He said, if something falls apart, it means you didn't build the foundation strong enough. Exactly. I leaned slightly forward. Right now, I'm wondering about the foundation of this conversation. Melissa crossed her arms. I don't see the connection. I do, I said calmly, because suddenly the pieces were fitting together.
Too neatly.
6 months ago, they started house hunting. 2 weeks until the deadline. A very specific number. 800,000, which meant something else. Something important. Daniel, I asked quietly, how much deposit have you already put down? Daniel froze. Melissa spoke sharply. That's not relevant. But Daniel answered, 200,000. I nodded slowly. And if the purchase doesn't go through? Daniel looked uncomfortable. We lose the deposit. There it was. The truth. This dinner wasn't about helping them buy a house. It was about saving them from losing money they had already committed. Melissa's voice cut through the silence. We believed you would want to help. Believe. Another interesting word, because belief usually comes before asking permission. I looked at Daniel. My house is not an emergency fund for your real estate decisions. Daniel rubbed his temples. Mom, Melissa leaned forward again. You're being unfair. Am I? Yes, she said firmly. You're acting like we're strangers. I held her gaze. For 10 years you treated me like one. Daniel looked between us. Can we not do this tonight? Melissa's voice sharpened.
No.
Actually, we should. She looked directly at me. You've never liked me. The accusation hung in the air. I blinked slowly. That's not true. Oh, really? She laughed once. Because it always felt that way. Daniel raised his hands. Stop. Both of you. But Melissa wasn't done. You've always treated me like an outsider. I tilted my head slightly. Melissa, you've never once called me Mom. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Daniel looked exhausted now. Can we just focus on the house? I nodded slowly.
Yes.
Let's focus on the house. Because the truth was, they thought this conversation was about convincing me, but they had no idea. The real decision had already been made, and the moment I told them what I had done, everything in their carefully planned future was going to change. Daniel looked exhausted. Melissa looked irritated, and I suddenly realized something important. For the entire evening, they had been talking about my future like it was already decided. The house would be sold. The money would appear. Their new life would begin. All that was left was convincing me to cooperate with the plan. But there was one problem with that plan. They had built it on an assumption. And assumptions can collapse very quickly, especially when the foundation isn't real. I folded my hands calmly on the table. Daniel, I said. Yes. I have a question for you. Okay. Why didn't you ask me about the house 6 months ago? Daniel blinked. What? You said you started looking for homes 6 months ago. Yes. And during those 6 months, you never once asked what I planned to do with my house. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Well, we didn't want to pressure you. Melissa gave him a quick glance. That glance said something very different. It said, don't say too much. I noticed it immediately. After a lifetime of raising a child and managing a household, you become very good at reading silent conversations. Melissa, I said gently. Yes, you seem very certain about my finances. She straightened slightly. I'm just being realistic. Realistic is usually based on information. She didn't answer. So, I continued. How do you know the house is worth $2 million? Melissa hesitated for half a second. Public records. That was technically possible. But something about her tone told me there was more. Daniel looked confused. What difference does it make? It makes a difference if someone has been researching my assets without telling me. Melissa's voice sharpened. We're not investigating you. Are you sure? Daniel rubbed his forehead again. Mom, can we just talk about the house? I nodded slowly.
Yes.
Let's talk about the house. Because the house was the key to everything. And the truth was, the house wasn't available anymore. Not the way they imagined. I reached into my purse. Melissa watched the movement carefully. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I pulled out a thin envelope and placed it on the table. Daniel frowned. What's that? Paperwork. Melissa's eyes narrowed. What kind of paperwork? The kind that answers your question about the house. Daniel looked confused. What question? The question of whether I'm selling it. Melissa leaned forward. So you're selling it? I slid the envelope toward them. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside was a copy of a contract. He scanned the first page, then the second. His expression changed instantly. What is this? Melissa leaned closer to read. Her face went completely still. The color drained from it in seconds. That can't be right, she said quietly.
But it was.
Daniel looked back at me. You already sold the house? Not exactly. Melissa's voice was tight now. What does that mean? It means the property is under a development agreement. Daniel frowned. A what? A development partnership. He blinked. With who? I leaned back in my chair. With the city. Both of them stared at me. Daniel looked genuinely confused. The city? Yes. Melissa grabbed the document from his hands. Her eyes moved quickly across the page. Then she froze. No, she whispered. Daniel looked at her.
What?
Melissa looked up at me slowly. You donated the land. Daniel blinked again. What? I nodded calmly. Not entirely, but a large portion of the property value was converted into a public project. Daniel looked between us. I don't understand. Melissa dropped the document onto the table. Her voice had changed completely now. You turned the property into a community development site. Daniel stared at me. For what? For a children's learning center. The words hung in the air. Daniel's mouth opened slightly. A learning center? Yes. Like a school? Not exactly. A technical training center. Daniel frowned. For who? For teenagers who want to learn skilled trades. Melissa laughed suddenly, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp, incredulous. You gave away land worth millions of dollars. I invested it. In what? In the future. Daniel shook his head slowly. But what about the money from the sale? Oh, there was money. Melissa's eyes locked onto mine. How much? Enough. Daniel leaned forward again. And where is it now? Working. Melissa's voice turned icy. What does that mean? It means I used it. Daniel frowned. For what? I smiled slightly. For a business. Daniel blinked. A business? Yes. Melissa's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. What kind of business? The kind your father always wanted to start. Daniel's eyes widened. The manufacturing workshop? Yes. But that was just an idea. Not anymore. Melissa shook her head. At your age. I met her gaze calmly. At my experience level. Daniel looked stunned. You actually started it? Yes. When? 3 months ago.
His jaw dropped.
3 months. Yes. Melissa leaned forward sharply. So you made all these decisions without even telling us. I tilted my head slightly. You made house offers without telling me. Daniel looked trapped between us now. Mom, that's different. Is it? Melissa's voice rose. Yes, it is.
How?
Because families make decisions together. I looked at her carefully. For 10 years, you kept me outside your decisions. She said nothing. Daniel exhaled slowly. So the house is gone? Yes. And the money is invested? Yes. And you're starting a company? Yes. He leaned back in his chair, completely stunned. Melissa looked furious, because suddenly, their carefully designed financial plan had disappeared. Just like that. And the most surprising part? I wasn't angry. I was calm, because for the first time in years, I had made a decision entirely for myself. And the future they thought they were planning? It no longer included my house, or my money, or my permission. Daniel sat completely still. The restaurant around us continued quietly. Waiters moving between tables, glasses clinking softly, distant conversations blending into the background. But at our table, everything felt frozen. My house is gone, Daniel repeated slowly. Yes. And you started a business. Yes. And you did all of this 3 months ago. I nodded. Melissa suddenly pushed her chair back slightly. You did this on purpose. I raised an eyebrow. On purpose. Yes. Her voice had sharpened again. You knew we were planning to buy a house. No, I said calmly. I didn't. She stared at me. You expect us to believe that? Daniel rubbed his temples again. Melissa? But she continued. You made this decision so you wouldn't have to help us. The accusation hung in the air. I considered it carefully. Then I answered honestly.
No.
Melissa scoffed. Then why didn't you tell us? I leaned forward slightly. Because for the past 3 years, you never asked me about my plans. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Melissa opened her mouth again, but before she could speak, I continued. You assumed. Daniel looked up. Assumed what? That my life had stopped. Neither of them said anything. I continued quietly. You assumed that because I'm older, my role now was simply to support your future. Melissa crossed her arms again. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Daniel looked at the table. Mom, we didn't mean it like that. I know. And I did. They weren't cruel. They were just short-sighted. It happens more often than people realize. When someone gets older, the world quietly begins to treat them like they're finished. Like their biggest contributions are already behind them. Like their story is mostly about the past. But the truth is, some people only begin their most interesting chapters later. Daniel finally looked up again. So, this business, what exactly is it? His voice sounded different now. Less defensive. More curious. I smiled slightly. It's a training workshop. For what? For manufacturing and skilled trades. Daniel blinked. Like machine work? Yes.
Fabrication.
Mechanical systems. Industrial repair. Melissa frowned. But why? The answer was simple. Because the city is desperate for skilled workers. Daniel leaned forward again. And you're running this? Yes. With who? With people who actually know the work. Daniel stared at me. How many? 7 instructors. His eyebrows shot up. 7. Yes. And the city is funding the student programs. Melissa looked confused. So, what do you get out of this? A business. Daniel looked impressed despite himself. And the workshop? Already operating. Melissa shook her head slowly. This is unbelievable. Daniel asked the question that mattered. Is it working? I smiled. Yes. In fact, I paused. 2 companies have already signed training contracts with us. Daniel's eyes widened. Already? Yes. And we're expanding next month. Melissa looked at me carefully. How much did you invest? I answered honestly. About 900,000. The number landed like a stone in the middle of the table. Daniel blinked. 900,000. Yes. Melissa looked stunned. You used almost the entire value of the house. Yes. On a startup. Yes.
Her voice dropped.
That's incredibly risky. I nodded. Yes. Daniel looked thoughtful. Dad always wanted to do something like that. Yes. But he never did.
No. Why?
Because life got busy. Daniel nodded slowly. Work. Bills. Raising a child. The usual reasons dreams get postponed. But something unexpected happened then. Daniel smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in years. You actually did it. Yes. Melissa looked between us. Daniel, this isn't some small project. This is a massive financial decision. Daniel nodded. I know. He looked back at me. But it's also kind of amazing. Melissa stared at him. You're impressed? Daniel shrugged slightly. Yeah. He looked at me again. You built something. I nodded. Yes. Melissa looked irritated again. Well, that's great for you, she said. But it doesn't change our situation. Daniel sighed. Melissa? No, she said. We're about to lose $200,000. The tension returned immediately. Daniel rubbed his forehead again. Mom, the deposit? I raised a hand gently. I know. You heard. Yes. Daniel looked embarrassed now. I didn't expect things to go like this. I know. Melissa leaned forward again. So, what are we supposed to do now? Her voice was sharper than before, but something in Daniel had shifted. He looked at her. Melissa, stop. She frowned. What? This isn't her responsibility. Melissa stared at him. Excuse me? We made the offer. But we assumed. She went silent. Daniel looked back at me. I'm sorry. For what? For putting you in this position. I smiled softly. You didn't. Yes, we did. No. I shook my head. You showed me something important. What? That sometimes people need to make their own decisions, even when others don't understand them. Daniel nodded slowly. Then he looked down at the paperwork again. This project, the training center. Yes. Is it open to anyone? Yes. He looked up again. What about management roles? I smiled slightly. Why? Daniel leaned back in his chair. Well, if you're expanding. Melissa looked shocked. Daniel. What? You're not serious. Daniel shrugged. I lost my last job 6 months ago. Melissa stared at him. You never told her that. Daniel looked uncomfortable. I didn't want to worry you. I nodded slowly. That explains a lot. Melissa looked frustrated now. You're not working for your mother. Daniel looked at her. Why not? Because... She stopped. Daniel looked back at me. You said you had 7 instructors. Yes. But businesses need operations managers too. I smiled. That they do. The waiter arrived with the bill. Daniel picked it up automatically. But before he could reach for his wallet, I gently placed my card on top. Dinner is on me. Melissa opened her mouth to protest. But Daniel just laughed softly. You know something, Mom? What? You might actually be the most interesting person at this table. I smiled. Only now. He grinned. I guess I should have asked about your plans sooner. Yes, I said quietly. You probably should have. And as we left the restaurant that night, I realized something unexpected. This story hadn't ended with a conflict. It had ended with a shift. Because sometimes people don't need to lose everything to learn a lesson. Sometimes they just need to see that the person they underestimated was never finished writing their story. Not even close.